Last time around, I spoke on the huge value within our investment management service, and I said it was probably the most important part of what we do. And I explained why, so take a look back on that video if you missed it. And at the end of it, I said I'd be back to you, and here I am, to talk about what I think is probably the second most important part of what we do. And yes, everything we do is important. All of the elements we work in are important. But in terms of what I want you to think about, this is number 2 for me. I left off in my last video by saying you can't leave a large estate to the kids. You just cannot do it. It's not feasible. And when I say, I should just point out large estate, it's always going to be subjective because people see things differently. But look, I'm talking about leaving them £1 million, a couple of million, 5 million, 10 million, whatever, big numbers. You can't just leave them that money. Problem number 1. They get it early on, and again, early on is subjective, but let's just say, for example, it's in their 20s or 30s even, and they waste it. It actually doesn't matter what age they are, but I'm just using a young age like 20s and 30s as an example to make the point. And not every child, not everyone would do this, but many do. They spend it on all the wrong things and quite often get into a whole sack full of trouble with it. And I'll leave that to your own imaginations. Problem number 2, and I know nobody wants this to happen, but maybe the children's relationships don't last. Maybe their marriages or partnerships or whatever break down. That could be relationships personally and even business relationships. And maybe, just maybe, people you don't even know today end up with 50% of the money that you've worked many years to build up that you pass to them. Certainly a bitter pill to swallow, and I talk about that in the book. Problem number 3. Maybe you think you're okay because you've written a will and it was done by a solicitor and you've got trustees and they've been guided to look out for the kids and they're going to look after them. But is it just going to pass to the children directly? Will they actually own it themselves? Because I can tell you the same problems can and often do happen. So, I mean, the solution, without going into too much detail, is to effectively detach them from any ownership of the estate, but still give them access to it in a controlled way. So they can't do any harm. And you can't do that if they just get it. If they inherit it, you've got no control over it. And frankly, neither will your trustees. Maybe they get a top up each year from a structure we set up that might give them 10 or 20% of whatever their salary is, whatever their salary earnings are, just to give them a boost, give them a bit more, to help them with property purchase. But it only happens if they're doing the right things themselves. And that's just a quick example. And there are other examples. But there are other issues to factor in too. And maybe perhaps in your lifetime, as a worst case scenario, 100% of your estate could pass to a new bloodline if a new husband or wife came into the fold 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 years later down the line. And I know that most people in my experience say they'll never remarry because of this and that, and it's understandable, and most people say it, but maybe it's not that long before the old black book comes back out and the dust gets blown off it, and onwards and upwards. Sorry, that's just come to me. Forgive the position and don't shout, but look, it's real. These things happen. People move on, they remarry. And I can tell you it causes and can cause huge problems and rifts in families. And it's going on in the family courts every week of the year. And I talk about these sideways disinheritance issues and situations in my book as well. So in essence, we need to be making sure that the estate isn't just a will which ends up in a family court in 20 or 30 years' time down the line with people fighting over a document that was written decades ago. The family courts in those situations would probably appreciate some form of written record to show that an ongoing trustee meeting was maybe held once a year, twice a year, in some cases, certainly on a regular basis, to make sure the family's wishes were considered and talked about and updated, and it was all managed on a rolling basis, and that what we agreed still stands up, and things were factored in. Anything that was going on in the family was talked about. And was anyone excluded? I mean, did we specifically exclude anybody from the estate? Exclusions can be just as important as included beneficiaries. The banks can't really help you with this planning anymore. Some of you won't trust the banks after a whole rift of things, including a global financial crisis that nearly crippled us all. And they've turned their backs on you in any event because there's no profit in personal banking anymore, is there? And that's the real reason, or the main reason, why they're shutting all of the branches. And yes, technology is a factor, of course it is, for sure. But make no mistake, there's very little profit in personal banking nowadays. They can't sell you anything anymore, can they? They've been stopped. So you might therefore look upon your big, strong, glossy network advisor as being the best option to help you plan ahead. Maybe they give you the impression that they're well capitalised and your money is safe, etc. But I have to tell you, you have exactly the same levels of protection working through a smaller, private, independent office like mine. Exactly the same levels of protection. There is no difference. And as an aside, the fund manager we deploy to run the money we're responsible for, Dimensional Funds, and we've used Dimensional for the last 10 or possibly even 11 years now, they have literally like 5 times the amount of capital under management when compared alongside the largest financial networks in the UK. They have something like $670 billion under their management now. It's about 570 billion sterling. The largest 20 networks in the UK don't have that between them. The biggest financial network in the UK has around 150 billion. Look, I'm not for everyone. I'm 50 years old now and well past caring about that, and I'm fine. And as I always say in any event, you'll never please all of the people. You'll only ever please some of the people some of the time. But I'm here for you and I'm here for your family if you want to plan properly. I'm here if you're planning for retirement and you don't have access to a planner, or you don't trust the bank anymore like perhaps you did in the 80s or the 90s. And I'm most certainly here if you don't trust active, expensive investment advisors or managers who literally fall off the cliff 80, sometimes 90% of the time, failing to match basic stock indexes like the FTSE, for example. I'm here if you want to protect your legacy and make sure that it's protected every year, not just on a one-off basis with a basic will that gets left in a drawer for decades on end and ultimately ends up being about as much use as a handbrake on a canoe. Financial planning, holistic financial investment and estate planning is worth its weight in gold. The big question I have for you is, what would it be, or what might it be worth to you? Take my retirement scorecard underneath. The link is under there. Click the link now, take your test and take care.